Hi, everybody. This is Jim Laval, clinical pharmacist, board certified clinical nutritionist in the Da Vinci Education Series. Today, we're going to talk about Triad 4 and systems biology approach to maintaining your patient's health. Triad 4 is all about liver, lymph, and kidney. And so, if you had to think of one term that you would work with on this, it would be about detoxification. But if you expand that view, it really involves, elimination of waste, obviously, and elimination of biotoxins and other types of xenotoxins that you get exposed to. It's about redox potential, meaning that as we get under more oxidative stress and we alter our pH, we change our enzyme function. And it really ends up being, all about metabolic processing and removal of the byproducts of your metabolism. And when this is going well, it, gives us a sense of smooth flow of substrates. If you're a big devotee of Chinese medicine, everybody, you hear the term, you have angry liver, right? There's emotions that get tied to when we're congested and feeling inflamed and feeling puffy and feeling stagnant and retaining fluid. That begins to create a whole set of feelings that people start to experience, makes them very uncomfortable. And when you think of some terms that may work with liver, lymph, kidney, we like to kind of think of these thoughts that get evoked. It's about moving things forward, processing, drainage. How effective am I eliminating? How effective are my fluids moving through me? Do I feel like I'm resilient or do I feel fragile? Am I reactive? Am I histaminic, which where we think of a lot of reactivity being, oh, it's mainly gut immune brain or triad 2, but your liver makes histamine. Your kidneys have mast cells on them that respond to this histaminic surge. So there's a real dependency of when organs of detoxification are not living up to their abilities, we lose that metabolic reserve. And we'll keep in mind that we realize that in particular liver and kidney do much more than just detoxification. They're involved in everything from red blood cell production and breakdown to managing electrolytes and managing fluid volumes in our body. Incredibly important functions in Triad 4. So liver, lymph, and kidney, and another way to think of that is metabolic processing, liver, homeostasis and elimination, kidneys, and then the lymph being internal drainage. And I find more and more people are having trouble on the lymph side of things these days because think how many people have biotoxin exposure, or they have vectors, so they're viral, bacterial, parasitic. Their lymph is in a or they're exposed to things. Their lymph is in a chronic state of always having to process and remove and help to scavenge. And there's this overwhelming effect, I think, living in a modern world on Triad 4. So as you think of this, for the kidneys, it's filtration, resorption, secretion of, electrolytes, for example. If you're intoxication, we're making things through phase 1 and phase 2 detox more water soluble to go out through the kidneys. It's about metabolite processing, regulation of hormones, blood pressure. pH is incredibly important as it relates to kidney function. And obviously one of the most important is electrolyte balance. And then when we look at the liver, obviously it's a site for, protein and hormone synthesis, You have detoxification cycling of phase 1 and phase 2, and really phase 3 detoxification is really the process of delivering it to the kidney.
This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah, so when you begin to look at the various functions of liver, lymph, kidney, I mean, obviously the kidney has this really important role in filtration, reabsorption, and metabolic processing, and everything from hormonal release and regulation to blood pressure and electrolyte balance. When you think of the liver, obviously phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Phase 3 is really more kind of kidney, actually, because it's eliminating the water soluble toxins as long as pH is adjusted at the kidney, right? So remember, when kidney pH is low, you get disassociation of metabolic toxins that then get recirculated and can damage tissues and shift redox potential, which we're going to go into a little bit during this talk. And then, of course, glycogen storage and carbohydrate processing, incredibly important with the liver, and then production of digestive chemicals as well. Probably by far the most important thing that we think of today with the liver is all about detox. But remember, hundreds of functions relate to the liver, everything from building red blood cells and breaking down tissues to creating adequate storage of glycogen, for fuel. And then, of course, lymphatic, issues are related to, interstitial fluid, drainage, and then actually transport of fatty acids. So efficiency in the lymph, I think, is underappreciated most of the time. So when you think of, why do people become toxic? First of all, you can think of, I think we want to think about genetics. I mean, I think the one area of genetics that's definitely, holds true is the HLA types that are way more susceptible to developing autoimmunity, because if their HLA series of gene SNPs are positive, well, then they really can become more prone to metabolic disruption, via exposures to biotoxins and toxic toxins like metals and solvents. And then, of course, there's single, nucleotide polymorphisms, so different SNPs that could impair detoxification, like MTHFR or MTR or ApoE or COMT. And then, then there's our exposure. And I have to say that, from my view, after doing this work for 30 plus years, I mean, I think that it's environment, but it really is what the environment does to us and what we do to ourselves that ends up creating intoxication. And our genes do play a role, but they're probably a secondary role. So there's this exposure to things like lead and arsenic and mercury and toluene and PVC. There's the exposure that people can get, through environmental toxins, permeability changes in their gut, different drug therapies that could have, a burden effect on your chemistry. But then obviously infectious agents, bacteria, viruses, funguses, biotoxins, and, so there's this pool of exposure that people are getting assaulted with every day that, you have, and what I find for a lot of times, what we end up doing with people is we end up trying to detoxify them too fast, and we get them in trouble. They feel worse. And the idea is identifying, what do I need to do to get started, so that you can be more effective at helping a person regain their metabolic balance that they're looking for. I mean, obviously, when you look at phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, the first thing you think about is the cytochrome P450 enzyme system. And look, we could have a 8-hour discussion on CYP450, but just keep in mind that, you need at a minimum cysteine and magnesium to move phase one detoxification across. And what's the purpose of phase one, of course, is to create a reactive intermediate that your body can go and try to process into a more water-soluble compound. That's the function of phase two. So you're taking fat-soluble toxins, making them water-soluble so that you can eliminate them. Now, what's interesting to me is forget about all the other nutrients that are dependent on for phase one detoxification, which is incredibly important because we're faced with a lot of lipid-soluble toxins. Just think of magnesium deficiency in the U.S. I mean, nobody eats dark green leafy vegetables anymore, and hence, everybody should be drinking a great green powder if they're smart. Nobody's taking enough magnesium. You're not getting it in your diet, and so therefore, people are compromised from the get-go on their ability to detoxify, simply because they don't have enough magnesium on board. And I know all of you have had patients, maybe you're already doing this. I make sure people get enough magnesium, virtually every patient. So, but think how many people that come back to you and go, man, that made such a big difference in the way I feel. Just something as simple as mag. But it's incredibly important because not only does it work on muscle tissue and cramps and headaches and, muscle soreness, energy production, helping your nerves, but it's critical in detoxification as well. And of course, what happens is we need other precursors to help with phase two detoxification. So adequate amino acids like glycine and taurine and sulfur donors, glutathione precursors like NAC, or using acetylglutathione or using glutathione, all help to drive phase two detoxification, which are basically different processes that your body uses in order to create a water-soluble toxin that your body can remove via the kidneys, via your stool, through your sweat, through breathing. That's how we eliminate toxicity, right? And then you just have to keep in mind that it's all well and good to get through phase one and phase two detoxification, meaning that your liver processes everything and basically puts a handle on the toxin, right? So basically when you think of phase one and phase two detoxification, your liver is putting a handle on that toxin to carry it out of your body. There's a couple areas where that can go wrong. One is, which we don't have time to talk about today, is because we'll talk about in Triad 5. We could, you talk about the fact that if you're in a high-fat, low-fiber diet, like a lot of people are with a ketogenic diet today, I'm not here to say ketogenic's bad or good. Just the fact that if you're in a high-fat, high-saturated fat, high-sugar diet that's low in fiber, you're going to make a lot of beta-glucuronidase, and you're going to take the handle off of your hormones that have been processed, and then they're going to recirculate. They're going to be free to be stored in your tissue. The other thing that happens is that if you get through phase one and phase two and make a water-soluble compound, you have a handle on that compound to carry it out through your kidneys. If your urine is not alkaline, meaning that if you don't have at least a 6.5 urinary pH, which is slightly acidic, and if you get down into the 5s or even low 6s, you're going to take that handle off the toxin again, and it's going to end up causing toxicity issues. So it'll recirculate, it'll become free. It ionizes basically, or becomes free, and that throws off the redox potential in your kidneys. And redox potential, why redox is so important, is redox potential in your kidneys is what keeps your kidneys healthy, meaning that the more acid you are, the more the rate of rusting in your kidneys, or the advancement or accelerated damage or aging that takes place. And guess what, guys? How many people do you see with GFRs in the 60s now that they're in their in their 50s? They're in their fifth decade, and their kidneys are already starting to go on them. So pH is critical for phase 1 and 2 detoxification to be successful. So, if you want to use something that'll help that, magnesium potassium citrate. You know, when you think of the nephrologists that are writing about the use of sodium bicarb to keep people out of acute renal failure, right? They prescribe sodium bicarbonate to keep the kidneys out of failure so you can delay things like dialysis. Well, why not work on keeping, you know, your urine alkaline way before that end stage, right? So alkaline urine supports secretion of toxins. And, you know, we think about oxidative stress, and once again, oxidative stress could be due to heavy metals, meaning that I can't process these metals out. It could be sulfur defects. It could be that you're not making, you know, maybe you don't have enough riboflavin on board and you can't get enough glutathione into your red blood cell. You may not have enough cysteine on board. So if you're not, you know, adequate with your cysteine, or you're using your cysteine pull up too quick, you can't make glutathione. And if you don't have enough antioxidants on board, you're going to increase your oxidative stress. And what I would invite you to do is just talk to your patients about oxidative stress being a rate of rusting. One of the easiest things you can do is take a urinary and salivary pH on them. If their salivary pH is, you know, below 7, then you know their rate of rusting is accelerated, and they're going to need antioxidants, and they're going to need green foods, and they're going to need a magnesium powder in order to get that pH balanced. Because this is what we're really trying to do is, and if you listen to, you know, Dr. Heyman's talk, he talks about the process of neuroinflammation. And neuroinflammation, what happens is that in the inflammatory process, you upregulate all of these free radicals on the left-hand side of the scale here, right? So on the teeter-totter on the left, hydroxyl radicals, hydrogen peroxide, superoxide radicals, peroxyl nitrite radicals, lipoxide free radicals. All of those things are increasing your oxidative stress. And we need our antioxidant defense, which is rich in compounds like vitamin C and E, and having enough glutathione, making SOD, you know, one of the great herbs to make SOD, milk thistle, right? And catalase upregulation. Alpha lipoic acid, incredibly important compounds to keep your body at neutralization. I think a lot of times people are looking for an aha moment with taking nutrients, and a little bit of explanation has to be, and if you want to detoxify every day, day in and day out smoothly, and not fall to becoming reactive and becoming allergic and histaminic and getting the damage from the environment, well, then you need a baseline of nutrients that your body can rely on. So that's, you know, once again, things like alpha lipoic acid, antioxidants, you know, things that support glutathione, things that support superoxide and catalase, all really important. And, you know, if you wanted to think about maybe measurements that you could look at, you can look at SOD, so you can look at superoxide dismutase. You can look at myeloperoxidase, which is a marker for an enzyme that shows that you're upregulating oxidized LDL, or you can just measure ox-LDL, right? You can look at microalbumin in the urine. You can look at beta microtubule in the blood. Probably one of my favorites for metabolic damage is deoxyguanosine, which is a great urinary marker, but it's a big marker for do you have DNA damage. And I think really a good marker to track to find out if what you're doing is being effective. I mean, obviously you can look at adiponectin. So adiponectin is a great marker for oxidative stress. The lower the adiponectin, typically if it's under 10, the higher the risk of oxidative damage. And then once again, look at that urine pH and look at salivary pH. When pHs are acidic, that means that you're increasing your rate of rusting in your body or increasing your oxidative damage. And you know, one of the biggest things that does this obviously is the toxic metals that are in the environment. If you look at the toxin registry for the United States as a part of the Department of Health and Human Services, arsenic is number one. Mercury, lead, polyvinyl chlorides. So there's solvents that can really create problems because they can penetrate cell membranes. And then there's metals. And why metals are so bad is because metals can attach to enzymes and then denature them. They can attach to enzymes and they can displace minerals. When you displace minerals, of course, you start to alter the function of the enzyme. It can, metals can, cause problems with cell membranes and not allow for the correct signaling of various processes at the cell membrane. It can, metals can create oxidative stress immediately. They trigger inflammatory cytokines. They can damage DNA and damage mitochondria. So, really getting people clear of metals, I think today it's not so much a problem of, am I toxic with metals? It's, well, how toxic am I with metals? Am I a good detoxifier? Is my body in a situation where I'm getting rid of things as they come in, or am I holding on to things? And I think that's a key piece for people to understand. We're all getting exposed today. And these were just, articles that came out. Striking dose responses between serum concentrations of 6 persistent organic pollutants and the prevalence of type 2 diabetes. Obviously, at this point, we've seen now over the last decade that exposure to pesticides increases your risk of becoming a diabetic, increases your risk of obesity. They've actually even shown that the more body fat you carry, the more toxic you are. That literally there's a linear correlation to BMI and level of toxicity. And this is, I think, interesting as well. Nearly all organ systems are involved in heavy metal toxicity. The most common, the reason I put this in here is I think it's a little bit comical because, the organ systems are the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the gastrointestinal system, the hematopoietic system, which, look, the hematopoietic system, that's how you make blood, renal and cardiovascular network. Well, what's left, guys? When you affect the central nervous system, you're affecting all your hormones. So the point being is that elevated toxic metals affect all organ systems in your body. When in doubt, you should think, is there involvement of toxicity? I kind of went through this already, but I just kind of wanted to make this a summary slide of, here's the problems that you see. You have neurotoxic issues, you have nephrotoxic issues, you have cardiovascular issues, anemias, Raynaud's, bone issues. You could have brittle bones, right? Bone density. The Veterans Normative Aging study showing that the higher the lead concentration in the bones of veterans, the more risk for cardiovascular disease, cognitive problems with toxic metals, mood disorders, virtually all the major insults of modern man. Now, granted, we're living longer than we used to. We just need to understand how we can face the issues of living in a chronically industrialized world so that we can be healthy as we're aging. And, even thyroid function, toxic metals, like mercury, have a dramatic impact on thyroid receptors. Pesticides are really have an affinity for thyroid tissue and throw off thyroid function. Obviously, things like chlorine and fluorine can cause problems because they displace iodine. And then endotoxins or mycotoxins can bind at thyroid receptor hormone sites and cause hormone mimicry. So, a lot of issues around intoxicants. And just, one of the most easy things to think of, there's so much anxiety and nervousness now. I mean, think of it. I mean, think of how many people are on medications for anxiety and depression. A subpopulation of those folks, there's no doubt there's some toxicity involved. And remember, the adrenal glands, probably one of the biggest sites where mercury vapors get oxidized. So the adrenals get really pushed. So the reason I'm bringing up thyroid and adrenal, and the fact that your gut gets involved and your brain gets involved is that once again, this unifying thought that all the triads are related. That when triad 4 gets out of balance and you can't detoxify anymore, it reaches into these other triads and creates relationship problems that then starts to really disrupt how a person feels. So, for example, lead, mercury, cadmium, all inhibiting adenyl cyclase, and that catalyzes the making ATP. And if you remember from Triad 1, the one word that symbolizes Triad 1 is energy. Am I making energy? And if you're intoxicated, you decouple or uncouple your ability to make energy. And, mineral interactions, of course, a lot of times when you have these toxic metals, arsenic displaces zinc, mercury can displace magnesium, calcium displaced by lead. So in other words, you can create deficiencies, not because you're just not getting enough, but because the toxin or the heavy metals that you're exposed to are displacing these nutrients from your body's chemistry. And so once again, looking at this kind of triad effect, mercury in the intestines. So literally, your intestines candida starts to grow to clacerate the mercury. So a lot of times when you see people detoxify from their gut, they'll notice themselves get foggy headed, or they may get some achiness, or may even get headaches, and that could be triggered by the fact that they're releasing some toxic metals while they're killing off their candida. And these are just some references on mercury and candida. And once again, more thought on these mineral interactions. So how can you identify toxic metals and organopollutants? There's a lot of different ways. And I would say people have, their thought processes on which way that they should do it. In my opinion, I've just seen that different metals and intoxicants could come out in different tissues at different rates. So if all you're doing is using urine, just realize that, urinary cadmium may stay up for a really long time before it drops down, because it's probably being released more in feces than it is in urine. The only reason I know this is that, we did a EDTA suppository trial years ago where we looked at blood, urine, feces, and what we saw were these variations in how metals were coming out based on us giving detoxification strategies with people. When you look at the most common test is a provoked urine, and what I always tell people is before you give a provoked urine challenge, always give minerals for a good month. Make sure that people are repleted, a lot of times even up to 8 weeks, get their mineral pools up, so that when you go to do a challenge, you're not pulling their already compromised magnesium pool and other minerals out of their body and leading to things like arrhythmias or palpitations or people feeling uncomfortable. So, build your mineral pool for the first 8 weeks, and then you can do a provoked urine challenge. I mean, this is obviously a sample report that you can see. Look, no amount is normal, but obviously the higher these readings, the more we get concerned. Sometimes people are morbid detoxifiers, and what you'll notice is in this report, they won't necessarily have much coming out, but maybe their mineral pool of their good minerals are down, and that might tell you that, they're secreting their good minerals but holding on to these toxic metals, and in which case you keep them going on maybe a modest detoxification program of, who knows, things like chlorella or cysteine, or, a nice metal detox product for maybe 30 days, and then retest them and see how they do. So let's take a look at this whole detox process. We talked about EDTA suppositories. This is something that's compounded. I won't go into it that far today, but it is a method that more people are relying on because it's easier than doing IVs. This is to be done under a doctor's prescription. Using glutathione, obviously you can get reduced glutathione. You can use acetylglutathione. Now there's liposomal glutathione. You can use precursors to glutathione like NAC and have them on B vitamins. Bottom line is you got to make glutathione in order to really protect your red blood cells and to protect your tissues. So that's why people are using all these various forms of either glutathione or its precursors. Alpha lipoic acid, probably one of my favorite agents, mainly because it's so protective. It's really big on keeping your redox potential up. So while you are detoxifying, you're protecting your tissues. It's a weak chelator. It's not a real strong chelator, but it's very protective against your kidneys, your nerves, and your kidneys from getting intoxicated while you're trying to detoxify. So it's incredibly protective. I use up to 1,800 milligrams a day, especially if I'm trying to affect insulin receptors and get weight loss. NAC, one of my favorite. Look, NAC's a big DNA modulator. So if you have a high deoxyguanosine, you want to get people on NAC. Remember that it's very kidney protective. You got a lot of people out there with those, low GFRs, creatinines are trending high. Think of NAC. And of course, its main, focus is that it's building glutathione. Dosing, at least get to 1,000 milligrams a day on it, I think, for the most part. You can always think of, NAC is one of those things where people can get it on a day in, day out basis, and it probably, be a good thing. You can look at the mineral folates. Mineral folates act as, chelators for toxic metals. Dosing on it varies, 300 milligrams twice a day. I'm big on methyl sulfonyl methanes. It's a sulfur donor. It's really good when people are histaminic. So they're rashing, their skin's red. It really helps with building glutathione. So, dosing typically, if you're looking for detoxification, 5 to 10 grams a day. You can go up to 15. Chlorella, love chlorella. You think of the green foods, chlorella is one of the big superfoods. You hear of broken wall chlorella because it allows you to get to the nutrients easier. One of the neat things about chlorella is it helps to, in addition to getting rid of things like mercury, lead, and cadmium, it also pulls some of the non-polar or the more lipid-soluble intoxicants out, like the dioxins, PCBs, PVC, and then also it has benefit in uranium. Dose somewhere between 3 to 5 grams a day on all the green foods. If somebody's belching it or having trouble digesting it, they may need a digestive enzyme that includes cellulates with it. That's why you use cracked wall. It tends to help it a lot more. Cilantro, another great nutrient. This one's a big detoxifier. It helps with upregulating glutathione. It reduces lipid peroxidation. So remember we talked about myeloperoxidase, oxidized LDL. Cilantro really good for reducing that oxidation of lipids. Now you can eat cilantro. You have to eat a lot of it every day. Or you may consider taking something that's maybe got cilantro or chlorella in it, or combinations of that in it, along with NAC. We'll leave aged garlic go. Milk thistle, this is the hallmark thing. I think most people could benefit from getting milk thistle because mainly is that it really helps with the liver, the kidney, and the pancreas, all with any kind of heavy metal detoxification. It helps with the regeneration of the liver. It helps with glutathione production. It helps with SOD production. It reduces that rate of rusting or oxidative damage. Typically, if you're going to use glutathione or use milk thistle to build glutathione, you probably want to be at 450 milligrams a day, but I've got the dose listed at 300 to 600 a day because you may have a product that has maybe 300 milligrams of milk thistle. Maybe it has some NAC in it. It could maybe have some chlorella in it for that matter. So, typically you want to at least get 300 a day in on milk thistle, but this is a real, kind of the center point of trying to help people with detoxification for the most part. It's really a significant issue. Remember, typically an 80% silymarin, which is a combination of chemical moieties that help milk thistle with its key functions. So the silymarin is actually a family of things. It's silibin, silidinin, and silicristin. So it's a family of extracts that are involved in that 80% silymarin. Obviously, when you look at this, inhibiting neutrophil migration, and it's nephroprotective, so it can actually help with kidneys. I mean, amazing, right? But the neutrophil migration is important because this is that whole food allergen response. So we don't think of milk thistle for food allergens or that biotoxin experience that happens with neutrophils. Think of using milk thistle as kind of that background state to help the immune system stabilize, which is something that's a little bit different than you've traditionally been used to. You can think of artichoke extract to help with bile production. It's got, obviously hepatoprotective effects. It helps with cholesterol and triglycerides. It can help with improving bile acid production as well. And so that kind of closes out the liver. Now we want to move on to the kidneys. Realize that without supporting your liver properly, there is no detoxification. Your liver takes on the brunt of detoxification. Other organ systems are basically helping the process along. So why do we have so much chronic renal disease now? Well, first of all, people are overweight. People have insulin resistance. So if you're overweight and you have insulin resistance, you're more than likely going to be pressuring your kidneys. The other piece is that it's really common with environmental burden. And it could also be common if you have gene SNPs that lead you to elevated homocysteine. And for most part, I find that, when I say kidneys is a forgotten organ, we don't think about proactively working on our kidneys. We just think of, oh, they're there and we're peeing, people with kidneys are working. You got to look at their renal function and really understand where they're going, what they're doing as they're moving. Because just remember, as people move into their fifth and sixth decades of their life, they're collecting oxidative damage, which is, kind of continually chipping away at their functionality of their organs, in particular the kidney state damage. And all of a sudden, they get to age 60 and they're, it's trouble. Their renal function's down. So the loss of redox is the key trait of lowering kidney function. So, and look, you can look at this in nephrology, journals of nephrology. It's the loss of redox poise. That's what creates the profibrotic activation, the pro-inflammatory activation that leads towards, renal hypertension and the loss of kidney function. And so once again, you've got all these free radicals, just like on the liver. On the one side, you got all these free radicals. On the other side, you've got very little support. So this is in light of pH, right? Just remember, an alkaline pH goes a long way to supporting protection of redox capacity. And, this is kind of the target for nephroprotection. So when you look at this, you have COX and LOX generating superoxide anions. You've got mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation generating superoxide anions. You've got SOD trying to neutralize those superoxide anions to create hydrogen peroxides and then create water and oxygen. And so if we don't have adequate catalase, if we don't have adequate glutathione, if we don't have adequate SOD, we don't have adequate alkaline function, we end up generating a lot of free radicals. So if you look here, this is a peroxyl nitrate free radical. This is a superoxide free radical. This is a hydrogen peroxide free radical. We need to understand that the more we can protect our kidneys, the more we take control of this, and that's why we need to have the nutrients on board. So who's at risk for this? Look, obviously, people that are, have metabolic syndrome are a big at risk point. But then it's just people that are exposed. I mean, and everybody's exposed these days. And, so what are some key learnings? If you want to really support, reduce oxidized LDL, you can think of things like Gage's garlic extract. You can think of things like acetylcysteine. Obviously, berberine will help with reducing oxidized LDL, making sure you have adequate tocotrienols. and vitamin E is incredibly important. So there's a lot of different strategies that you can deploy that will help maintain vascular pliability and reduce the risk of renal hypertension. And then, one of the things that I like measuring too is vascular endothelial growth factor. So the higher the VEGF, the more they're prone towards chronic renal failure. And this is also associated with C-reactive protein elevations, TNF-alpha, elevations, disruptions in their copper and zinc dismutase or their SOD, and then their total peroxide load. So once again, when you think of a systems biology approach, it's one thing if you see somebody with an elevated VEGF, but if you see them with an elevated VEGF, an elevated CRP, an elevated MMP9, metalloproteinase, and an elevated oxidized LDL, well, that's telling you they are moving towards multi-organ damage. So the endothelium is being damaged, the kidneys are being damaged, the liver is being damaged, and most importantly, the brain's being damaged. And this just kind of goes to the forces that look, this is straight out of a textbook, right? So kidney function. If you look, this is what they're saying creates the problems. Insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, for one, so you could get to it that way. But if you look at it on the left-hand side, reactive oxygen species could be due to mineral deficiencies, right? Low mag, low potassium, low pH equals oxidative stress imbalance. The more your oxidative stress is upregulated, the more you push yourself towards insulin resistance. And the more insulin resistant you are, the more you drive oxidative damage. But as you look at this, as your insulin resistance goes up, your hyperinsulinemia goes up, a couple things start to happen. One, you're going to retain sodium and spill out mag and potassium and create an acidic pH. That's the far right. In the middle, you have increased sympathetic dominance, right? So as your insulin resistance is high and you're hyperinsulinemic, you increase sympathetic tone and release of adrenaline, noradrenaline. That creates more arterial stiffness. The arterial stiffness leads to vascular dysfunction. And then you start to get endothelial remodeling, which thickens the endothelium. And then, of course, as we look over here, the oxidative stress triggers the renin-angiotensin system. And just remember, what's happening is angiotensin 1, under the forces of increased visceral fat, is triggering angiotensin 2 via the release of angiotensinogen. And that means that my blood vessels are going to get thick, and I'm going to end up with a renal hypertensive event. And that's why, Triad 1 is so important. Managing adrenal, thyroid, pancreas is so important, because the more we lay down oxidative fat and visceral fat, the more we release these chemical compounds that have a downward effect, a downstream effect on the kidneys and Triad 3, the cardiometabolic triad of cardiopulmonary neurovascular. Do you see how these things all start to kind of stack up? They really start to stack up and create, it's disturbance. And so if you look at this, you can begin to kind of see how the detox pathways start to trigger problems in all of the other triads. And I just kind of brought this up because, lipid peroxidation affects triads 1, 2, 3, and 4, hyperglycemia, at least in addition to triad 4, triads 1 and 5. Actually, you could think of it as triad 2 as well, because when your blood sugars are off, your brain becomes less efficient, and it's the old story of type 3 diabetes being Alzheimer's, right? So, the whole purpose of this is just to kind of get you to understand that as you're loading these tensions into these various networks that you've learned about in the triads, that filtration and elimination ends up having a lot of impact, global impact on all of these systems. So what are some things that you can take? Well, one of the best things you can do is you can take glutamine. Glutamine is important because it affects glutathione function. Glutamine actually has a powerful effect on immunomodulation and regulation of white blood cells. It helps with heat shock proteins and reducing cellular injury, which I think is really important. And then, of course, glutamine helps to reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines to get released in the gut immune system in the gut. It helps with repairing the gut. As the mucosal barrier is breaking down, the mucosal lining is conditionally essential for glutamine. And so glutamine is one of the simplest things you can do that will spare the kidneys and help the gut lining. So if you look at this kind of global impact on the body with glutamine, if you take a look, your glutamine pool supports glutathione synthesis, so that helps with scavenging of free radicals and reduced oxidative stress. It enhances insulin sensitivity. So if you look up to the far left, it has an impact on that. It helps to preserve ATP. And remember, ATP just isn't about your thyroid. ATP production means your cells have the energy to perform their function. So detoxification has a big impact as it relates to when your ATP levels drop, your body can't detoxify. As you look here, it also helps to manage inflammatory cytokine activity. It helps with improving the mucosal barrier. It helps with lymphocyte function. So in terms of lymph, it's incredibly important. So, glutamine, although we think of glutamine for the gut, one of the most important things that you can do for your kidneys is get people on glutamine. And then we want to think about nitric oxide synthesis too. So as people, take a blood pressure on people. If people are up over 120 over 80, if they're 130 over 90 and they're a little overweight, their nitric oxide pool is poor. And low nitric oxide is directly associated with chronic renal disease and high blood pressure. And remember, most hypertension starts as renal hypertension. And nitric oxide gets downregulated as people get insulin resistant because their superoxide goes up and it triggers endothelial dysfunction. And your kidneys are at the heart of this. So your kidneys take the brunt of this damage between relationships of Triad 1 and 3. So you want to make sure people are taking things like citrulline or nitric oxide support. They could take beet powders, right, so that they can get the blood vessels to dilate. And remember, you need magnesium for that dilation too. Probably one of the better, kidney remedies is goldenrod or Solidago verourea. It has a great diuretic effect, an antioxidant effect. It has antibacterial effects. But this is one of my favorite agents that supports kidney function. There's a variety of them. I mean, you can look at dandelion. Obviously NAC is important. Cordyceps is important. But love goldenrod because of its effect. You can look at 500 milligrams twice a day, even as a powder, or some people use it as a tincture as well. Dandelion, where's the value of dandelion? Well, first of all, it acts as a diuretic. It helps with kidney sparing effects, meaning that when people see it's a diuretic, they forget that it's taking pressure off of the redox potential. It also, dandelion helps in terms of colorectal effects, so it helps with the gallbladder. And then dandelion also helps with GI microflora diversity. I think that's amazing, actually. And then there's other, I think, new innovative, agents that we look at. This is from the Ayurvedic repertory called Shatavari, which is basically, Indian asparagus. And it has great immunomodulatory effects. It has great mixed Th1 and Th2 immune function, so it balances your immune system. Has a bit of a nephroprotective effect. Anti-lithiatic, look, magnesium and B6 is anti-lithiatic too. Has some anti-inflammatory effect. Remember, people get toxic. So this is a, assessment of renal function of workers exposed to inorganic lead, calcium, or mercury vapor. So if you take a look at the bottom, let's just kind of drop down. It says, first of all, there's an increased risk of higher beta-2 microglobulin concentration in plasma without a change in urinary beta-2 microglobulin concentration. So occupational exposure You can start to see changes in the serum before urine. And then kidney damage will cause decreased urinary mercury output and a departure from body burden representativeness. So what does that mean? It means if our detoxification capacity for our kidneys is reduced, we can start to store these into tissues. And so when you look at cadmium renal repair, this is really interesting that when you look at where is damage at, so occupational exposure at 10 micrograms per gram, but some damage seen as low as 2 micrograms per gram, take a look at where people are at with their kidney function when you do their toxic metal. A lot of times people are way over the 2 microgram per gram creatinine status on kidney tissues. So this is just kind of showing you that this is real, guys. People get exposed to things. And in chronic renal failure, just remember, chronic renal failure, all your CKD cases, you could actually recapture and regain some renal function with them by helping to support the reactive oxygen species downregulation, meaning help with glutathione support, help with SOD support, help get their pH in a more alkaline state to support their renal function. And just remember, you synthesize arginine at the kidneys, and it's really important to have enough arginine or citrulline on board. That way we can get a nice dilated blood flow into the kidneys. And just remember, in acute renal failure, there's, major signs pointing to the fact that nitric oxide depletion is a big factor in why that's occurring. If you look at sustained release arginine, I think that's an interesting compound, but you can use arginine from any source and citrulline and help to build nitric oxide pools. Remember, beets do it well too. So there's a lot of different key nutrients that you can utilize for the kidneys. You can think of, I'll tell you what, alpha lipoic acid is incredible, glutamine incredible. Using things like turmeric, boswellia, all important for kidney function. And just keep in mind, this is the things that start to happen with people. People start to get allergic. They start to gain fluid. They begin to get myalgias. They feel destabilized and stressed out. They get puffy feeling. This is a big problem that occurs as people begin to take on toxin load. And these are things that you may see. Their GFRs could be normal or even trending high for that matter. But you may see some things starting to pop up, like, they're dyslipidemic. Their C-reactive protein is high. Maybe their homocysteine is elevated. These are early warning signs that there could be a problem. And then, of course, as things progress, you can see fatigue. You can see more weight gain, more puffiness, maybe a ruddiness to the complexion. You start to see them being more stagnant and stressed. They begin to get edema. You start looking at pitting edema on them. Their skin starts breaking down. And of course, in the most advanced states that start to occur, like as you start to move across liver, lymph, kidney, their liver enzymes start to elevate. So once your liver enzymes start getting in the 40s, you're starting to load fat into it. You get non-alcoholic fatty liver. You begin to see portal hypertensions. You can begin to get the presence of metals, solvents, other toxin loading. Maybe you have you have gene SNPs that are affecting your detox capacity, and then you can start to see from the kidney side, people start to become pre-hypertensive. That's why everybody should have their blood pressures tracked on a regular basis. They start to notice that their GFR is going down, and you start staging them for their CKD. Their lymph becomes clinical. They get really puffy with pitting edema. And, this is just a good example of an individual. And then we're going to close out with this. Brian was a 42-year-old male worker who had worked construction as long as he could. He started smoking at age 13. There you go for cadmium. That's his favorite hobby, besides hanging out with his buddies. He can drink a case of beer over a weekend, sometimes more when a game is on. And nowadays, with cable TV, you can always find a game. So, in other words, he's hammering those canned beers, which are going to allow for some more toxicity. His wife is no good, and neither are his good-for-nothing kids. And he wouldn't have to get so angry if they just do what he told them to do. But usually, he just wants to be left alone. There's his mood. He's gained some weight around the middle and occasionally his belly, and he has some pain in his belly. But hey, that's just the way it is. He admits he doesn't feel great, and just recently he noticed his legs look almost shiny. There's the lymph, and there's the venous return, and there's the blood vessel damage, and there's the toxicity from being exposed chronically. So what does he have? Well, he's actually beginning with a little bit of jaundice. He's bruising easy. His liver's a little inflamed. He's fatigued. He's got declining urine output, and he's got a little bit of lymphedema, and that's why his legs are starting to be shiny. And of course, we can see these kind of progressions start to take place with people as they keep moving on to their pathology. But Brian's a typical story. Brian's the guy you need to jump into and make changes before he does progress. What does Brian need? Well, he needs to be evaluated for environmental exposures. He needs to look at digestive complaints. We've got to help him with detoxification, give him some mitochondrial support, get his lymph draining, decrease his oxidative burden. So what we would do is put him on an anti-inflammatory diet, get rid of the high lectins, maybe give him some amino acids to reduce his catabolism, maybe some branched-chain amino acid powder or a whey protein powder could work out really well. Maybe clean up his gut. He's kind of yeasty when he's drinking a lot of beer like that. Some basic things that, Brian's going to need is, probably should be on a multi and omega-3 fatty acid. Does he really have a lot of gut problems? The more gut problems, the higher you go with probiotics when you're first treating someone. Rotate those probiotics occasionally. Make sure you're using, some interesting things that can help with, beating up the candida. If not, you could use something like curcumin. What's his gallbladder like? You could use milk thistle. You could use artichoke if you need to. Are there any known toxins? Think of using NAC. So the thing is, let's get to Brian's. What do you do to get started? So a great plan for Brian. Sorry for that, guys. Great plan for Brian getting started. Needs to be on a multi, needs to be on a probiotic, should be on milk thistle. Probably give him some artichoke extract to help that gallbladder out. You can give Brian even some beet extract. If I'm working with him, I always use homeopathy. I'm a big fan of Nux vomica because it's a strong liver remedy. Lymph, if you're not going to use homeopathy to help with lymph, I'd suggest you use bioflavonoids to knock down the histamine response so that they can start to process their lymph more, their lymph fluid more readily. Obviously, with kidneys, arginine, glutamine, NAC, and then if you want to use an herb of some sort like solidago or dandelion, that's all you need. And that's where you'd start to stabilize him. So, in the end, guys, what I'm really hoping we only had a brief hour today to discuss, but I hope what you learned is that, first of all of these organ systems are playing off each other. Secondly, that you have to get the foundations of detoxification together in order to move a person forward. And that means correct for their pH before you do anything, get their mineral balance up before you challenge them, work on the basics of improving renal blood flow, supporting if they've got poor GFR to get that GFR up, changing their diet, supporting their phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Look, nobody escapes the need for this. It's just understanding when they need it. If you're a Brian, you need to work on Triad 4 right away. Triad 1 and 2 and 3 will come later. but you've got to improve his detoxification because he's already been, intoxicated himself to the point where it's affecting all other aspects of his metabolism. So I hope you enjoyed this hour today. It's another installment of the Da Vinci Education Series on the metabolic triads. This is Jim LaValle wishing you good health. Enjoy your day.